Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And it's the day after the first day of the release of patch 9.2. In this patch, we saw set bonuses returning to the game, double legendaries introduced to the game, massive changes to classes and balance tuning, and likely the largest iteration on player feedback that we have yet seen to date in this patch. And I have found an interview here on Wowhead with Ian Hassakostas, the lead game designer. And I wanted to cover my thoughts and go over some of this interview to see what is really going on with 9.2. I'm definitely a big fan of the recent rounds of PvP changes. There was some recent additions that I struggled to find to get into a video, but there was a very small amount, basically targeting the mana regeneration of healers aside from Paladin, nerfing them by about 5%, and targeting things like Mass Dispel, so the Greater Fade Mass Dispel mechanic no longer being interactable, and the fast Mass Dispel talent being a longer cooldown, so you can't just always immediately Mass Dispel everything. But every change that they made towards PvP made a lot of sense in those changes, and I really do like the iteration on account-wide systems for patch 9.2. So far, the biggest grievance that I've seen or feedback towards this patch, although I don't really personally share it, is the fact that content is time-gated. So you log into the patch day, you're going to go through the campaign quest for a bit, maybe spend about an hour to 3 hours in Zereth Mortis before you're going to start hitting a diminishing return wall on like the kind of return on what you're getting from that zone. That's going to kind of weekly reset. To me, the big advantages of the zone are that it is account wide. The campaign progression is account wide. The double legendary unlocks, I believe, are account wide, and even the conduits, I think, to my understanding, are going to now be account wide and achievable through whatever metrics that you want to be doing in the game to unlock them, which were all points of feedback that for myself as a PvP player, I am really excited to see. We also see here in the interview, they discuss the creation catalyst, and this is a system whereby if you don't want to raid, or if you get really unlucky and you're not getting your tier set bonuses, this creation catalyst will come in at some point, and I'm really hoping sooner than later, because I'm generally not very lucky when it comes to getting RNG loot. And actually, RNG loot is one of the biggest determining factors on whether I do specific content, because I hate going after RNG loot. That's why I preferred PvP back in the day with Mists of Pandaria and Wrath of the Lich King or Kata, because you could pick the pieces you want, work really hard and get them, and achieve the ratings and unlock them. Whereas in raiding, it was like week after week, oh, this trinket is never dropping, this trinket's never dropping, and I couldn't handle that frustration. So I'm really hoping that this account-wide system is coming in sooner than later. It's going to allow you to catch up your alts as well as the season progresses through, so that they can get access to those set bonuses. And a big deal with those set bonuses is that a lot of classes right now in the patch, if you've logged into, this is my experience, are a lot weaker, at least in regards to PvP. I'm not sure if this is the same sentiment in Mythic Plus, but a lot of specs now with the changes to the trinket bonus, not having access yet to the double legendary, not having access yet to the set bonuses, their throughput is dramatically lower. The stamina change on the trinket bonus means his health pools are higher. The games feel a lot slower. And specs that were relying on killing in those very specific burst windows just can't hit that burst window high enough to be able to execute on now these higher stamina pool windows. Some specs still can. The ones that were excessively high, like Ret Paladins, now kill you about as fast as the lesser specs did in the previous patch, at least for now. The only thing I can say to that is to kind of weather the storm out, because when I tested the specs in 9.2's PTR with all of their gear, double legendaries, things like Balanced Druid or Demonology Warlock, they were able to get out some really massive numbers, felt really good, and I had a really fun time testing on the PTR. But playing them in the actual patch with the current gear that they have and none of the new unlocks, they are significantly weaker. You're probably going to log on and be frustrated by the fact that it's not playing the way that you might have seen a video on it play, and I just wanted you to take that into account. So right now it does feel like we're mostly waiting for these things to kind of start to ramp up, and then we're going to get to that point where the game has been more balanced and tested and tuned for, because right now it doesn't feel like it's tuned for this specific set of gear, and then you'd have to readjust it when all the new stuff comes in as well. But that's kind of an unfortunate side effect. Regardless, I am a big fan that they were thinking ahead on this to deal with the RNG loot, because that's a really big grievance of mine. They've left some mysteries to raid bosses. So the last 3 bosses have been untested publicly. So anyone interested in that is going to have an exciting time with that. I talked about the account-wide progression. So being able to just immediately skip through parts of the game that were kind of more tedious or repetitive, and allowing you to push forward. And then gameplay beyond power progression. But we understand, we certainly heard loud and clear from the community that if we put player power that will increase your damage in a dungeon or damage in a raid behind a system, it has now become mandatory, whether that's gameplay you enjoy or not. And so having this is something that is for hardcore power gamers optional, but still deep in something they can take at their own pace. It's something we're trying to do to offer a range of options without pressuring people to play the game in a way they'd rather not. That was a really big paragraph for me in this interview, because I think a lot of players have their own little avenues that they like to go down. For me, it's PvP. I'd like to really only focus on doing PvP content, upgrading and unlocking things through PvP. And not be dragged into doing world quests or questing content, or even really a ton of PvE content in general. Maybe if I can do it, it's great, but not that I have to do it. So this is hopefully meaning that that game is going to be led into more of that direction, where you can kind of pick your lane, do what you want to do, and then branch out if you choose to. You'll have it as an option. Because I think having options is great, but when it becomes the mandatory force, this is the only way to get something. You'll see that with the removal now of sockets. Sockets are no longer a thing that you will have to unlock. And they talk about the min-max mentality. For a long time, it seems like there was a battle between this sort of min-max mentality when players understood they don't have to max out their characters, but it always felt like, no, people want to max, and if they don't, they feel like they're missing out. Is that the conclusion you also came to? Hazacostas, that's one of the big lessons learned over the course of Shadowlands. It's a trend that's present across gaming in general, the metagaming, figuring out what the metagame is. A new game comes out and people want to know about the tier list for classes or characters. Heaven forbid you pick the wrong one. In Shadowlands, we set out initially having some options. This statement right here is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Heaven forbid you pick the wrong one. Because when you pick a spec that is underperforming or undertuned, you're not desirable. You feel like you're holding the group back. And that's a very bad feeling to have. And even if it's a spec that you really want to play, thematically, fantasy-based, rotation feels fun, whatever it is, if the spec is not performing and you can't get into groups and you're isolated and you're left alone and you felt like you're holding everybody back all the time, that's not a good feeling that should be put on somebody who's just trying to skip over that. Like, sure, there's the other side of it where people are just only caring about playing what's the best and they want to be number one. But sometimes there's some specs that get really held back and you're just going to have a rough run through the game if you pick them. And you don't want to be put into that option. So not super big fan of that. In Shadowlands, we set out initially having some options, some rewards that we imagined would be just for the hardcore min-maxers, completionists. If you want to chase these, adding a socket to your gear for a fraction of a percent of damage, or upgrading this conduit for a fraction of a percentage of damage, we wanted to give that to people who wanted to go deep on their characters rather than going broad and playing lots of alts, something to work for, some reason to do it. I would really rather the content be fun and the content be the reason to do it. For example, pushing really high in PvP also allows you to unlock these, or clearing the mythic raid boss. Well, the raid bosses did let you get the conduits, but not the sockets. So maybe a currency towards the content for sockets for clearing the mythic raid, encouraging people to push their limits and push their ability in the game to get these power unlocks for their characters as motivation, rather than going back to an activity or a task that is kind of beneath them in terms of their own player ability, and they might be bored of it. It might have been repetitive. Rather than forcing players to go back into that type of content, have these types of min-maxed rewards for players to push their limits in whatever given content of the game that they enjoy, a high keystone, a raid, in PvP, whatever it may be. So you're encouraging everybody to play together as a team, work together and perform and be better, rather than isolating and farming and grinding alone for these currencies and content that they're really not having fun doing. At least I wasn't having fun doing, would have been my perspective. We often hear feedback that people are upset when they run out of goals and lack motivation to do anything, but we found, to our initial dismay and horror to some extent, it is a much broader range of players than we expected saw this 0.4% power increase that was behind something they didn't necessarily enjoy doing as absolutely mandatory. And that's not the outcome we wanted. The game needs to be fun. Yes, see, exactly. You need to log in and look forward to the adventures you're going to have, the things you'll do with your friends, the stuff stuff you're going to explore, the goals you're going to chase, and not feeling like you have a set of chores you have to accomplish before you can play the game the way you want to. As much as possible, we're pivoting away from that and trying to offer true options without power dictating gameplay. Another big paragraph for me, at least, with the way that I enjoy playing the game, and a nice detailed interview. I like that they're talking about these specifically, and I'm hoping that they do continue in those directions. They talk about borrowed power from the artifact system onward. The fact that things were temporary enabled the team to pull out all the stops on them, make them more immediately impactful, deeper transformative of your gameplay than they ever would have been if they needed to last forever. If they were all going to be these additive things for your character, imagine having all your talents plus your full artifact weapon plus Azerite powers plus covenants. At some point, it would just be complete nonsense. At the same time, we recognize the part of an RPG, part of progression is the feeling of growth, of moving forward, of gaining power, and the knowledge that you're going to leave most of all of what you're earning behind. It does diminish the sense of accomplishment and growth. These expansions often start with a feeling of loss, which isn't ideal. Rather than getting something new and exciting, you're working to replace the old exciting thing you just lost. That's all stuff we're heatedly discussing. We approached Shadowlands systems in much more constructed way that didn't have open-ended grinds to them, but still allowed for meaningful and additional choice and gameplay depth. Looking back and continuing to look at Covenant abilities and the way they've transformed gameplay, those have been tremendously successful. We're already hearing players say, I hope I can keep invoking spirits forever because I can't imagine playing a druid without this ability. That's a sign of success. See, this is the real juggling problem that they've got now with classes and ability bloat, as it was called in Mists of Pandaria, because every expansion prior to Mists of Pandaria did have these new spells and things layered on and added to every expansion. It was kind of the exciting thing to log on if you really liked exploring the classes with what new spell are we going to be getting this expansion and how's it going to add into our existing toolkit. And then they decided to take the direction of trying to remove a lot of that bloat, so classes weren't getting to that huge spread out level in terms of keybinds and things like that. And now it's kind of just been this new formula of add remove. They had the unfortunate circumstance of BFA where they removed Legion, but there wasn't anything new to go for in BFA. And I think that had a really negative impact that Shadowlands fortunately corrected by having these Covenant abilities. But much like the artifact abilities, these Covenant abilities, I'm feeling are likely to go away, considering at the start of Shadowlands, they weren't even going to be usable anywhere other than in Shadowlands zones for a bit. Makes me think they're going to go away, and they need to be replaced. There needs to be something else to go after, to level up, and to grind and unlock and be excited to see in my mind for classes, because that was something that BFA really missed the mark on. So hopefully that is the case, but I know that there's going to be something that I'm going to miss pressing that comes into the new system if it's not replaced, most certainly. And you can almost feel that even just in this patch by not having the set bonuses and the legendaries that I tested on the PTR, and then now not having them and being like, this doesn't feel so good. So this is a really big deal. I'm very curious to see where this type of discussion goes. Because this is kind of one that I think has a lot of debate around it. This is a really good, well-detailed interview that I liked reading. And they talk a little bit at the end about cross-faction guilds. They say they're possible, which is something that I never thought would happen. Initially I didn't think cross-faction, they would ever say the word possible in the same sentence with it. So they're going to be gathering feedback towards that. I think it's 9.2.5 that they're intending to have cross-faction groups and stuff like that. So we can maybe all play whatever it is that we want to play, faction or race-wise. But other than that, that's it for the interview. That's it for my 9.2 discussion. What do you think so far of the initial release? Just wanted to give you my first thoughts, kind of give you that warning on what specs were kind of, your spec might be underperforming right now just because it doesn't have the new things. But I really enjoyed reading this interview. I got a bit overwhelmed by Zareth Mortis trying to figure out, because I've got paranoia from Korthia and stuff. I'm like, what am I missing out? What am I forgetting on doing? But it seems like you can take it pretty chill. And that seems to be my plan now for it as well, is get the campaign done. It's the most important thing for the account-wide unlocks, and try and just do a little bit of stuff. Maybe unlock the weekly is what I'm aiming to do, because I'm expecting this patch to probably be a pretty big one, like in terms of length. So I think I'm going to be able to get to all these unlocks by the time that it's going to really matter. Maybe even just wait for this the Forge, the Creation Catalyst Forge, to try and get my set bonuses if I don't feel like doing the raid. Or maybe if I do feel like checking out the raid, I'll jump into the raid and see if I can give it a go. But I can already tell I might be a bit frustrated by trying to get things to drop based on RNG. I mean, I'm even experiencing that in TBC as I'm trying to unlock stuff for my druid, so I might avoid that frustration entirely. Just not a fan of RNG loot anymore. Think it's an outdated system. Much prefer pushing difficulty, gathering currency, and having an attainable goal through deterministic method for myself. But other than that, if you'd like to stay up to date with news and changes to the game, make sure you hit the subscribe button, absolutely free. Just let you know when those videos go live. And I do stream on twitch.tv/Supatease every day. And we're at day 130 now in a row. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.